others as you would have them do to you. And have a brighter by and by. Lord, dear Lord above, God Almighty, God of love, please look down and save our people through. I believe God is now was them, and always will be. With God's blessing, we can make it through eternity. Lord, dear Lord above, God Almighty, God of love, please look down and save our people through.
Singing our theology in changing times. Changing times, traditional hymns totally banished from some congregations to be replaced by praise songs and contemporary musical styles. Light shows to enhance the performance of performers singing for the gathered congregation community. Organs and even pianos sent to the dump, or in the case of some pipe organs, a neat kind of background on which to hang the screen. Deep, profound, challenging theology replaced by make me, the individual, feel really good without expecting too much in return. Theology of a grand, far-off God replaced by the theology of a God who is with us in spirit, demanding that we be involved in change and in social justice. A wrathful God of the Old Testament replaced by the God of the New Testament, where stories and events are measured against the gospel of love as preached by Jesus. As Dr. Kick at First Plymouth Church in Lincoln, Nebraska says, reading the Bible as a friendamentalist as opposed to a fundamentalist. For several years, I have had a Sunday evening ritual of watching a webcast of the morning service from York Minster Park Baptist Church in Toronto. In the late 1960s, while studying at the Royal Conservatory, I was very young, only about 5 years old. My organ teacher was the organist at York Minster Park. The largest Baptist church in Canada, York Minster maintains a very traditional worship service with a large choir with paid soloists and paid section leaders that sing primarily music from the English cathedral tradition, accompanied by one of the finest pipe organs in Canada. No screens to be found in the sanctuary at York Minster Park. In the last several months to this tradition for Sunday evening, I have added watching parts of one of the 4 morning services at First Plymouth Congregational Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. The main service has a choir of about 75, a brilliant organist, and perhaps one of the finest choral conductors I have ever observed. At this traditional service, traditional hymns are sung and magnificently accompanied on the great pipe organ at First Plymouth. Some hymns are accompanied on the piano or by the resident brass quintet or their resident chamber orchestra. One of the other morning services is very contemporary with their band. One service is half an hour, a scripture reading, a short sermon, 2 hymns, and out you go. As some of you may know, one of the 3 founding traditions in the United Church of Canada was the Congregational Church. The mission statement at First Plymouth is very similar to the statement that we read at the opening of each service here at Grace. On March 25th of this year, Dr. Jim Kick, lead minister at First Plymouth, included in his sermon some comments about the use of traditional hymns at the church. He stated that, quote, hymns are not popular in many congregations. People want to watch a singer as opposed to singing themselves. Hymn singing is considered oddball. He went on to say that the theology of many older hymns is antiquated, the language is often sexist, and he wonders sometimes, when looking out at his congregation, if people are wondering if they will agree with the theology in the next verse. With those statements made, he went on to say that the use of hymns, newer hymns and traditional hymns, are a masterful union of melody and theology in ways that many contemporary worship songs with 1 or 2 lines of text cannot compare. Theology through singing is a great teaching mechanism. The act of singing together forms community. Many commentators on the current state of church music have said that congregational singing is one of the few opportunities in today's world where people come together to sing. The use of traditional hymns and melodies give us a link with our past. Those melodies and text being sung and heard today still have meaning and connect us with those who have gone before. Of course, in many of the newer denominational hymn books and song books, inclusive language has become the norm, and texts are altered to show a new concern for social justice and action. The old African-American spiritual that we heard this morning to start the service and the related gospel jazz-style song after the scripture reading came from a singing tradition that helped to create a supportive sense of community in very challenging times and express a theology and hope in relationship with God, even in the darkest situations. We will now hear another spiritual. And I realize that you're applauding Shirley not because we're at the second half of the sermon. In thinking about today, I was interested to read a blog by Chuck McKnight, a young gentleman who blogs about many aspects of progressive Christianity. The title of his article that caught my eye was, "What Hymns Still Work for You as a Progressive Christian?" My first question was to ask, what are some of the descriptors for a progressive Christian? Progressive Christians believe that following the path and teachings of Jesus can lead to an awareness and experience of the sacred and the oneness and unity of all life. This one really struck out. Here is one that very much describes Grace United. Progressive Christians seek community that is inclusive of all people, including but not limited to conventional Christians on a broad spectrum from conservative to the left of center liberals, questioning skeptics who may attend events in a congregation, folks with questions about ideas and practices that seem outdated from a distant past, those of all sexual orientations and gender identities, those of all classes and abilities. This one is very important in light of the sermons we have heard from Stephen in the last few weeks. Know that the way we behave towards one another is the fullest expression of what we believe. Looking back into his African American roots, both musically and theologically, the great arranger, composer, and choral conductor Moses Hogan used a gospel idiom to express his assurance that comes from feeling that he is a child of God. In looking at the text, one wonders if we have lost the sense of Jesus as being a reality, a real friend in this troubled world in which we live. Could so many troubled lives in 2018 find comfort in having that close personal experience? Unfortunately, Moses Hogan died in his mid-40s with a brain tumor. He was just a brilliant arranger and composer. The choir is now going to sing his piece, "I Am His Child."
I
In his blog, Mr. McKnight went on to explain that growing up, he had had a fundamentalist church experience: fire and brimstone, unworthy sinners going to hell. He has left much of that negative theology behind, but the one thing he does remember and cherish is singing hymns that were such a part of each service. He has no regrets about singing those hymns and feels that they are still so much part of him. Mr. McKnight appreciates contemporary church songs, but feels they do not, and this is a quote from him, hold a candle to the depth and beauty of many of those classic hymns. But he went on to say that hymns can be problematic. Theological ideas that are exclusive and just bad theology in today's world. Some hymns express beautiful theology in the first 2 verses or 3 verses, and then comes a zinger that you don't expect. He mentions the use of the word wretch and the negative connotations that such a strong word brings to mind. Can a wretch really be granted God's grace? He mentions some of the old hymns that the writer was bathed in the blood of Christ. One reply to his blog did mention that John Newton, the writer of Amazing Grace, probably did feel like a wretch after working as in an encampment on the coast of Africa, where slaves were held prior to being placed on ships bound for the British colonies in the Caribbean and the United States. Later, he was captain of one of those ships. The article concludes with an invitation for readers to respond to the following questions. What hymns still work for you, even though they might have problematic areas? Have you had to modify the lyrics of any hymns? And anybody using Voices United knows that many lyrics have changed. What hymns would you still love to sing if it were not for the problematic lyrics? There were many interesting responses to these questions following the posting of the blog. One respondent felt that if someone considered the stories of biblical events to be allegory, characters and stories that were meant to have a deeper spiritual meaning, most traditional hymns would be acceptable. Interestingly, the most widely accepted hymn was Be Thou My Vision. The words represent qualities that appealed to many different people, and the use of the ancient Irish lullaby tune had great appeal. My calm in all strife, I ever with thee, and thou in my life. One woman responded, this I found very interesting, that she was recovering from church after many years as a church musician, but when she was working in her kitchen now on Sunday mornings instead of attending church, she loved to belt out hymns such as Great is Thy Faithfulness. We can seemingly turn away from the church, and yet in some cases there is a seed buried deep within us through the music of the church. One person stated that the editors of a new edition of an American denominational hymn book had approached a contemporary Christian composer to change one line in one of his songs from wrath of God was satisfied to love of God was magnified, but the change was refused, so the hymn song didn't make the book. Another reply stated that the person still really enjoyed traditional hymns with their poetic texts, and that there might be a fuss or two over certain words or ideas, but he could kind of gloss over them. Respondents found many contemporary songs trite in language and boring musically, likely because they tried to mimic the pop tunes that we hear every day. I'm sure that there are many who would disagree with that. The response that I found most interesting came from the son of a Southern Baptist preacher, the son having left the church behind and was now an atheist. It was interesting because in times of trouble and difficulty, he still found what a friend we have in Jesus to be uplifting and comforting. Again, music planting a seed. I wondered if he found the usual tune and words of comfort, or were the words alone the source of his comfort. Let's stand to sing What a Friend We Have in Jesus and be prepared for just a little twist. curious. When I first sang these words to this tune, the words took on a whole fresh meaning or lost a sense of that over-familiarity. Singing our theology in changing times. Here at Grace, we try to have a mixture of old and new. We sing hymns that reflect the glory and majesty of God. In most cases, we try to be inclusive. We also sing newer hymns that reflect a concern for social justice for all peoples in all sorts of situations, and that show a concern for our environment. We sing new hymns that reflect a more contemporary musical style. We sing hymns and songs, old and new, that try to reflect that we live what we believe. As in several of the responses to the questions listed at the end of the blog, there are those who feel that some hymns have been destroyed by changing text and trying to be politically correct, and some feel that some of the traditional hymns still contain too much blood and reflect a God who is far removed from the world. In any case, we fuss over one or two things, but we come together and share as a singing community. Shirley Arena Murray is a New Zealand hymn writer who currently has her hymn texts published in 140 hymn books around the world. We have 12 of her texts in Voices United and 7 in More Voices. Some texts are set to very familiar old tunes and some to newly composed tunes. A number of composers have arranged her text in very fine choral compositions. If you return on Sunday, November 18th, and I hope we see you before then, you will hear a stunning setting of Everyone Born for cello, piano, and choir. Murray's texts have been praised for using inclusive language, bold appropriations of secular terms, and direct confrontation with contemporary issues. For Everyone Born, words by Shirley Murray will be our pastoral prayer this morning. The words will be sung by Andrew Paton and Jennifer Eames, and the words will be projected on the screen. Contrary to what you may see on the screen, Jennifer and Andrew will sing all of this wonderful hymn while you reflect on the text.